Just last night, folks, I added a whole bunch. See the links in the video description. I added a whole bunch of data to one of my essays on violent crime and homicide. It's this one, whether the COVID pandemic increased homicide rates. Well, in a way it did, but it's mainly in Democrat voters went crazy, and it's in jurisdictions owned by Democrats, usually. And I added 3 more states just to add. I think this is the final update until I do another big data dump in the summer of 2024. I added Wyoming, I added Idaho, and North Dakota. And at the end of this, I'll play a clip from Clay and Buck concerning that young man who was apparently murdered by a lunatic Democrat. And the young man, the 18-year-old kid, was, call him a kid because he's a lot younger than me, was murdered because he was supposedly a Republican extremist. So is that Joe Biden's? Joe Biden, are you responsible for that? But I did add North Dakota. Now there's not much to, not any surprises except for one. Wyoming, North Dakota, and Idaho are uber Republican states. They have very low homicide rates. Surprise, surprise. They're very white, very low homicide rates. Surprise, surprise. Are you shocked? I'm not. So what I did is I found there's only one county in Wyoming that could be considered uber Democrat, and I was hard finding good data for this. But anyways, it was just one county, and it had a homicide rate, Teton County, and it only had a homicide rate from 2017 to 2021. Wyoming's 21 report is out, of 1.709 per 100,000. So even the one Democrat enclave in Wyoming, people are behaving themselves. That homicide rate is way below the national average. Then I took all the counties in Wyoming that voted 66% or more for the Donald twice, and there was a whole bunch of those. Because he won the state by so much, I raised the threshold from 60 to 66. I did the same thing for Plug's Biden in California. Those counties from 2017 to 2021 had a homicide rate of 2.709. So my challenge again, find me a state, Democrats, any state where the whitest, most pro-Trump counties have homicide rates higher than the national average, higher than the state average, and higher than the Democrat counties that voted overwhelmingly for Biden or Hillary. And so Wyoming is not another one that does that. And those counties that voted uber Trump have homicide rate less than half the national average from 2017 to 2021. No surprises when you look at there's not much data in Wyoming pertaining to race of murder victims. In 2021, of the 14 murder victims, 14.28%, or 2 of them were black. 11, or 78% of the victims were white alone. Of the 12 offenders, only 2, or 16.66% of them were black. And 9 of the offenders, 75% of them, were white only. And keep in mind, Wyoming's tabulation of this, Hispanic is lumped in with white. So, Wyoming's 92.4% white alone. And it's 80-some% white non-Hispanic. Then I went to, we'll save North Dakota for last. I went to Idaho. There's only one county in Idaho that could be considered uber Democrat, and that's Blaine County. And it comes down to, from 2017 to 2021, Blaine County only had 1 criminal homicide, so their homicide rate was less than 1 per 100,000. Idaho is a very safe place. So Idaho from 2017 to 2021, according to their state police, had a homicide rate of 1.944. So I didn't tally all the pro-Trump counties, so that would be a lot of them in the 66% range. I didn't bother to do that because outside of Blaine County, you're still safe. So the uber pro-Trump counties in Idaho do not fit the template. They do not have a homicide rate higher than the national average, higher than the Democrat counties, the really pro-Democrat counties, and higher than the state average. And keep in mind, Blaine County is just one county. So I don't know, even if they did fit that, there's so few Democrat counties there that they're such a tiny sliver of the population. I remember California's data, those pro-Republican counties, the ones that voted Trump 60% or more, versus the ones that voted Biden 66% or more. Now, those few Republican counties only had 900,000 people combined in a 3-year time frame. So a very tiny part of California's population. And they did have a homicide rate higher than the very pro-Biden counties and higher than the California state average, but it was below the national average. So California was the one that's got the closest. Now to North Dakota, where that sick murder homicide occurred recently. There's only 2 counties in North Dakota that can be considered uber Democrat. That's Rolette and Sioux counties. And I was able to go through their data. And North Dakota makes it hard because they don't do like Oklahoma or Michigan does, where they'll list the county and then all the agencies under that county. You have to go through and find them all. Makes it so if I did it for all the pro-Trump counties, I'd be there for hours and hours, and I'm not going to do that. But I did do it for Rolette and Sioux, which are the very 2 pro-Democrat counties voting for the Democrat presidential candidate 60% or more. Read the data. I explain why. I'd get into that. They only had 2 homicides from 2017 to 2021. North Dakota's 2021 data is out. And they only had a homicide rate of 2.271. So even in the very pro-Democrat areas of North Dakota, you're safe. North Dakota has a very low homicide rate. However, here's the surprise for North Dakota. From 2017 to 2021, there were 86 arrests for murder in North Dakota, and 81 of those, authorities knew the race of the offender. Of those 81, 45.67%, or 37 of the arrestees, were black or American Indian / Alaska Native. Let me say that again. Of all the arrests for murder in North Dakota from 2017 to 2021, where authorities knew the race of the offender, 45.67%, or 37 of the arrestees were black or American Indian / Alaska Native. From 2017 to 2021, there were 3,821 arrests for violent crime in North Dakota. That's murder / non-negligent manslaughter. Negligent manslaughter, these are the ones I picked. It doesn't fit what the FBI says, sue me. Murder, non-negligent manslaughter, negligent manslaughter, kidnapping / abduction, I can't even talk, rape, and that includes sodomy, fondling, sexual assault with an object, and aggravated assault. Now, in those arrests, where the race of the offender was known, those 3,821 arrests, 35.98%, or 1,375 of the arrestees were black or American Indian / Alaska Native. Effectively, less than 10% of North Dakota's population is committing more than 45% of the homicides and over 1/3 of all violent crime. Remember, in these statistics for North Dakota, Hispanic / Latino and white are lumped together. I could not find data on the race or ethnicity of homicide victims, just age and gender. North Dakota is roughly 84% white alone, not Hispanic or Latino, only 3.5% black, 5.7% American Indian, 5.7% American Indian / Alaska Native, 1.7% Asian, and 4.4% Hispanic / Latino. So that was the only surprise that I found in that data. Again, less than 10% of North Dakota's population is committing more than 45% of the homicides, going by the arrest data, and over 1/3 of all violent crime. So, a little bit of a surprise there. In a very low homicide state, it's 2 very small segments, 2 small demographics that are, well, when they're less than 10% of the population, 45% of the homicide offenders, that's a big signal right there. Now to Clay and Buck on this heinous murder by a Democrat. Apparently, I'll keep following this, but it appears that we have a lunatic Democrat murdering a Republican extremist in North Dakota. And I will mention this too. I'm going to keep going on this. Even if it was a Republican running over a Democrat and it got big news, when you look at the data over broad time frames, and in many states, the most violent jurisdictions in America tend to have a lot of black-on-black homicide, a lot of fatherless children, a lot of working-age folks taking a break from the labor force, and they tend to vote Democrat. And what this 24/7 crazy news cycle does is they'll find one thing, and they'll beat the drum on that, and they'll ignore all the black-on-black homicide in Democrat areas like Philly, Chicago, Detroit, Newark, Wilmington, Los Angeles, the Twin Cities. They'll ignore the sky-high homicide rates in Democrat enclaves like the Twin Cities, Buffalo, Rochester, New York, Camden, New Jersey, Chicago, Baltimore, Detroit, Flint, Pontiac, Michigan. I can go on. And they do that to distract you from the fact that looking at broad time frames and the broad picture, it's areas, Democrat voters typically, in areas that have been ruled by Democrats for decades, where the massive spikes in violent crime are occurring, and there were already cities like Milwaukee that were already on the skids, and it's getting worse. So keep that in mind. Clay and Buck, the floor is yours.
A North Dakota man, obviously a Democrat in this situation, named Shannon Brandt, called the North Dakota Highway Patrol on Sunday, saying that he had struck a pedestrian in an alleyway in McHenry with his 2003 Ford Explorer. And what he really meant by that is allegedly he used his car as a weapon and ran this individual, Cayler Ellingson, 18 years old, down, murdered him with his car. That is the allegation. Brandt claimed at the time that Ellingson was part of a Republican extremist group. This is according to the Highway Patrol report. What really happened here was, again, from the police report, there was an argument over politics, and this individual, who is clearly left-wing, Shannon Brandt, ran down this 18-year-old and killed him, allegedly in cold blood here. I mean, they're saying this, obviously, there's a legal implications. You know, you have to always say until there's actually a conviction. But Clay, we all understand that if this were different, if a guy in a metaphorical or real MAGA hat had run down some Democrat, a Hillary voter, in his car because they had had an argument over politics, we would be told by CNN and MSNBC and the New York Times that we need a national conversation about the threat of MAGA extremism, white supremacy. Even the two guys involved here, white, doesn't matter. White supremacy, MAGA extremism. This is the political violence that they put right at the feet of Donald Trump himself. Joe Biden he looked like the Emperor Palpatine from Star Wars.
Yes.
The theatrics around this, it did honestly look like Stalin was giving a speech in the darkest days of the Soviet Union when the purge was going on. And a couple of weeks later, this happens. Now, the left would connect those dots if the political affiliation was different. How many people have even heard about this story, or more to the point, how many have seen a major news network, other than Fox, even touch on this story?
Well, there's a bunch of things here. First, you're 100% right, because we know this. One person, I believe I'm correct, Buck, you can correct me if I'm wrong, died in Charlottesville, and it was laid directly at Donald Trump's feet because he had the audacity to come out and say, which you go back and look at the transcript, that many of the people, which he was correct, who were protesting the removal of statues were right, and that this wasn't going to end with Confederate statues and it would move on to Thomas Jefferson and George Washington and even Abraham Lincoln. He was 100% right about that, what I think is fair to call woke history and the way that it's being attributed.
And the lie is why Joe Biden ran for president, just so everyone remembers that.
Lie,
Joe Biden said,
because
based on that lie.
The lie was that Trump had called these Nazi protesters very fine people. He did not. He pointed out that there were very fine people on both sides, which was accurate. He directly condemned neo-Nazis and everybody else. You go look at the transcript. This is one of the great lies that was spread by the media to attack Trump. So we know he was held completely responsible for the death of, I believe, that woman in Charlottesville. This story is receiving no attention at the New York Times, no attention at CNN, no attention at the Washington Post, okay? And frankly, we need to get some answers from the North Dakota politicians about what exactly is going on here, Buck, because this guy was only charged with vehicular homicide, which seems like a relatively low charge, and he's out on bail. $50,000, Buck. All he had to post was $50,000, and he's already out on bail. Now, maybe, to be fair, there are some details and circumstances surrounding this case that are not yet public that would justify that being the case. But this is a red state where a Republican supporter was, based on the details that are out right now, killed based on his politics. How in the world are North Dakota politicians not speaking out about this? How is the AG not speaking out? How is the governor not speaking out aggressively? And how does a guy get a vehicular homicide charge for what appears to be and intentional murder. And how does he get it? How is he already back out on the streets for a $50,000 bail? Now, again, I want to be clear. If there are details in this case that are not yet public that can explain that, we will share them on this show. But, Buck, I looked into this pretty aggressively. I'm sure you have as well. I haven't seen anything that would suggest this is anything other than what has been reported so far.
Is this a hate crime is another question
Yes.
we might want to pose for everybody. Killing somebody over politics. It actually is something that the left would argue is terrorism. They would say that this guy is, if he were a Republican who killed a Democrat over a political fight, this would be labeled terrorism.
It would also be on the front page of the newspaper. It would have been a lead story for multiple days. MAGA extremism, this is a natural result and outgrowth of everything that Trump has said.
And look, I mean, we're a country of 330 million people, although given all the illegal immigration, who knows what the real number is. But we're a country of 330 million people, and one individual's actions should not be placed at the feet of an entire political ideology. That is true, but the problem is the Democrats do that to us all the time. Every time, and even sometimes when there's somebody who is in no way actually a conservative or a Republican, but, they had a couple of right-leaning views on something, they believe in secure borders, they're a terrorist, oh my gosh, it's Donald Trump's fault, right? Whatever it may be, they will make the leaps necessary because they see all this as political warfare, friends. You have to understand, it's not about what's true. For the true leftists these days, for the commies that are in our midst, whatever they have to do to achieve political power, they think is inherently justified. Our media certainly is in that category right now. They believe that lying is a necessary step in defeating the MAGA extremism that has swept through the country. And they won't stop and say, wow, Joe Biden's actually really bad at this, and we shouldn't be supporting some of these idiotic policies, notably on the crime issue.